The billionaire was taping another missing poster to a lamppost, his hands shaking with 3 months of unanswered prayers, when a little girl touched the photo with her small finger and whispered, "Sir, that boy sleeps in my house." What she revealed next wouldn't just lead him to his son. It would shatter every truth he thought he knew about faith, darkness, and divine intervention. Daniel Carter had built kingdoms from concrete and ambition. Board meetings in glass towers, private jets slicing through clouds, a mansion that whispered power with every marble step. But all of it became meaningless the morning his 7-year-old son, Ethan, vanished from their gated estate like smoke dissolving into air. 3 months, 92 days of living hell. Since that morning, the billionaire had become a ghost wearing expensive suits. His empire still ran, but he moved through it like a man underwater, every breath a conscious effort. What good is the whole world if I've lost the only piece that matters? He asked God every night, kneeling beside Ethan's untouched bed, the superhero sheets still wrinkled where his son had last slept. That autumn afternoon, the sun broke through the clouds as if mocking his darkness, painting the streets gold while his soul remained black. Daniel pulled on the same navy jacket he'd worn for weeks, the one that had stopped smelling like his cologne and now carried only the scent of desperation. In the back seat of his car sat towers of folded posters, each one showing Ethan's gap-toothed smile, the face that haunted his waking hours. "I'll search every neighborhood in this city if I have to," he murmured to the empty car, his voice cracking on the last word. He drove toward the older parts of town, where the streets narrowed and the houses leaned into each other like weary friends. These weren't the neighborhoods where people recognized his face from Forbes covers. Here, Daniel Carter was just another broken father, and somehow that felt right. The cracked asphalt rattled his car as he parked beside a row of aging townhouses, their paint peeling like old memories. He stepped out slowly, carrying his stack of hope and heartbreak, feeling the weight of every failed lead, every dead end. Every night he'd prayed until his voice gave out. He stopped at a black lamppost wrapped in rust, pressed a poster against the cold metal, and carefully taped each corner. The adhesive fought him, curling at the edges, and he had to smooth it down 3 times. "Please, God," he whispered, his breath fogging in the cool air. "Someone has to know where he is. Someone has to have seen my boy." His fingers lingered on Ethan's face in the photo, touching the printed smile like he could somehow reach through the paper and pull his son back home. The autumn wind moved through the bare trees, carrying the smell of distant rain, and for a moment Daniel felt utterly alone in the universe. Then a soft voice, small and certain, cut through the silence. "Sir, that boy sleeps in my house." Daniel's entire body went rigid. The tape slipped from his fingers. His heart, which had been beating slow and heavy like a funeral drum, suddenly exploded into chaos. He turned slowly, afraid that any quick movement might shatter this moment into another cruel dream. Standing on the sidewalk was a girl, no more than 9 years old, barefoot despite the autumn chill, wearing a faded blue jacket over a gray shirt. Her eyes were wide and honest, fixed on Ethan's face on the poster. "What did you say?" Daniel's voice came out strangled, barely more than a whisper. The girl stepped closer, her small hand pointing at the poster with absolute certainty. "That boy. I've seen him. He comes to our house at night. I hear him crying through the walls." Time collapsed. The street disappeared. The entire world narrowed to this child's face, her trembling finger, her impossible words. Daniel dropped to his knees on the cold sidewalk, bringing himself to her eye level, his hands shaking so violently he had to press them against his thighs. "Are you certain? This boy right here? You've seen him?" His voice broke on every word, hope and terror wrestling for control of his throat. The girl nodded, her expression serious beyond her years, as if she understood the weight of what she was saying. "Yes, sir. He's very quiet. He draws pictures." Daniel's breath caught in his chest, sharp as broken glass. "Calling for who?" he managed to ask, though he already knew, could already feel the answer breaking him open. "He calls for his dad," the girl said simply, innocently. not understanding that those 3 words were both salvation and devastation. The world tilted. Daniel pressed his hand over his mouth to hold back a sob that threatened to tear him apart. Images flooded his mind with violent clarity. Ethan drawing at the kitchen table, tongue stuck out in concentration. Ethan running through the backyard, arms spread like airplane wings. Ethan's voice calling, "Dad, watch this," before jumping into the pool, all of it rushing back with the force of a train, 3 months of suppressed memories crashing through the dam he'd built around his heart. "Dear God," he breathed, the words half prayer, half collapse. He looked up at the girl through eyes blurred with tears. "Where do you live? How far?" The girl glanced back over her shoulder, her long hair catching the afternoon light. "Just around the corner, sir. 4 houses down on Maple Street." Daniel couldn't process whether to believe her, to run, to scream, to pray, to collapse right there on the broken sidewalk. His mind spun through possibilities. What if she was mistaken? What if this was another dead end that would destroy what little remained of his sanity? But those eyes, that certainty in her voice, the specific details about the crying and calling for Dad, it felt like the answer to every desperate prayer he'd screamed into the darkness for 3 months. He took a shaking breath and ran his hand through his hair, now more gray than brown, from months of grief aging him a decade. "Can you take me there? Can you show me?" His voice was raw with barely controlled desperation. The girl, Grace, he would later learn her name was Grace, frowned slightly, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her young face. "I can, but my mama might be upset if I bring a stranger home." Daniel leaned forward slightly, tears now running freely down his face, no longer caring about dignity or pride or anything except the possibility that his son might be 4 houses away. "Please. I promise I won't cause any trouble. I just need to see if it's him. Just need to know if my boy is alive." His voice cracked completely on the last word, breaking into pieces. Grace studied his face for a long moment, her young eyes seeming to see past his expensive clothes and into the shattered father beneath. Then something shifted in her expression, a decision made with the kind of innocent bravery that only children possess. She nodded slowly. "Okay, mister. I'll show you, but we have to be quiet." As she turned and began walking down the sidewalk, her bare feet silent against the concrete, Daniel stood on trembling legs, his whole body feeling like it might come apart. The wind shifted, catching the poster he'd just hung, making it flutter against the lamppost. Ethan's smile seemed to move in the fading light, and for the first time in 92 days, Daniel felt something he'd thought was dead. Before we continue this journey that will test everything Daniel believes about faith, evil, and the mysterious ways God answers desperate prayers, I need you to do something for me. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Hit that subscribe button because this story goes places you won't expect. Like this video and share it with someone who needs to hear about miracles that come wrapped in mystery. Now, let's continue. Grace moved ahead with the quiet confidence of a child walking familiar ground, her small frame seeming to glow in the slanted autumn light. Daniel followed 6 feet behind, his expensive shoes clicking against pavement that had long ago given up smoothness for survival. His heart hammered against his ribs like something trying to escape. Each beat, a war drum announcing either resurrection or final devastation. The neighborhood wrapped around them, narrow streets lined with houses that leaned slightly, as if tired from holding up too many hard lives. Paint peeled from window frames. Chain-link fences sagged. Children's toys lay scattered in yards like abandoned dreams. This was a world Daniel Carter had never truly seen, despite all his wealth, despite all his supposed understanding of the city he'd built his empire in. Grace moved ahead with the quiet confidence of a child walking familiar ground, her small frame seeming to glow in the slanted autumn light. Daniel followed 6 feet behind, his expensive shoes clicking against pavement that had long ago given up smoothness for survival. His heart hammered against his ribs like something trying to escape, each beat a war drum announcing either resurrection or final devastation. But to understand what was about to unfold, to grasp the full weight of what Daniel Carter was walking into. You need to know how a billionaire's world can collapse in a single morning. You need to understand the 92 days that had transformed him from king of an empire into a man who would kneel on dirty sidewalks and beg strangers for hope. You need to know about the morning Ethan vanished, and the 3 months of hell that followed. It had been a Tuesday. Daniel remembered because Ethan always had soccer practice on Tuesdays, and the boy had been excited about showing his coach a new move he'd invented. Daniel had kissed his son's forehead at breakfast, promised to leave work early to watch practice, told him he loved him. By noon, Ethan had disappeared from the gated estate during what should have been a supervised playtime in the backyard. The security footage showed nothing. The nanny swore she'd only looked away for 2 minutes. The gates never opened. It was as if the earth had simply swallowed a 7-year-old boy whole, leaving no trace, no clue, no mercy for the father who would have traded his entire fortune for 1 more minute with his child. The police came, then the FBI. Private investigators, psychics, reward posters, news coverage. Everything money could buy and desperation could fuel. But 92 days later, Daniel Carter had nothing except a bedroom that still smelled faintly of his son's apple shampoo and a faith that had been tested to the point of breaking. He'd prayed until his voice gave out. He'd bargained with God in ways that felt both sacred and blasphemous. He'd wept in empty boardrooms and screamed at heaven from the rooftop of his mansion. And somewhere in those 92 days, Daniel had learned that wealth couldn't buy what mattered, and power meant nothing when you were powerless to save the one person who made your life worth living. Now, following a barefoot 9-year-old girl down a cracked sidewalk in a neighborhood his GPS called marginal, Daniel felt the weight of every one of those 92 days pressing against his chest. Grace stopped in front of a narrow townhouse, painted a faded yellow, its front porch sagging slightly on one side. She turned to him with those 2 old eyes and whispered, "This is my house. But we have to be careful. My mama gets scared easy." Daniel nodded, unable to speak, unable to do anything except follow this child who somehow held the answer to every prayer he'd screamed into the void. Grace pushed open the front door, which groaned on hinges that needed oil, and called out softly, "Mama, I'm home." A woman appeared from the kitchen. Mid-30s, thin to the point of fragile, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and heavy secrets. Her gaze landed on Daniel, and something flickered across her face. Fear, immediate and undeniable. "Grace, who is this?" Her voice trembled, hands gripping a dish towel like it was a lifeline. Grace looked between them, her young face serious. "Mama, this is the man from the poster." The dish towel slipped from her fingers. Daniel stepped forward carefully, the way you approach a wounded animal. "Ma'am, I'm Daniel Carter. My son has been missing for 3 months. Your daughter told me she's seen him here. And I need to know if that's true. I need to know if my boy is alive." His voice cracked on the last word, all his carefully practiced composure crumbling. Mara's eyes darted to Grace, then to the stairs, then back to Daniel. Grace has a very active imagination. She sees things that aren't there. "I'm sorry for your loss, but I can't help you." She was lying. Daniel could see it in the way her hands shook, in the sweat that had appeared on her forehead, in the way she positioned herself between him and the staircase. Before he could respond, Grace spoke with a certainty that cut through the room like a blade. "Mama, God keeps showing me things in my dreams. He keeps saying, the boy is not far. He keeps saying, darkness hides him, but light will find him." Mara's face crumpled. "Baby, please don't start with this again." But Grace wasn't finished. She looked at Daniel with eyes that seemed to hold ancient wisdom. "I can show you, mister. I can show you proof." Without waiting for permission, she turned and walked toward a narrow hallway, her bare feet silent on the worn carpet. Daniel followed, his breath coming short, feeling Mara's terrified presence behind them. Grace led him to a small bedroom, painted soft pink. Stuffed animals arranged neatly on a bed that had seen better years. She knelt beside her dresser and pressed against the floorboard, which lifted with a soft creak to reveal a hollow space beneath. "I found this 2 weeks ago," Grace whispered, reaching into the darkness. "I've been praying about what to do. Then I saw you today, and I knew. I knew God sent you." She pulled out a wooden box, old and scratched, and set it gently on the floor. Daniel's hands shook so violently he could barely lift the lid. When he did, the world stopped. Inside lay a small blue shirt with a superhero logo. Ethan's shirt, the one he'd been wearing the day he disappeared. Beneath it, wrapped in tissue paper, a lock of light brown hair. Daniel's vision blurred as he lifted out a stack of papers, drawings in a child's hand, showing stick figures and crooked houses and suns with too many rays. In the corner of each one, written in Ethan's distinctive backward scrawl, the initials E.C. Beneath the drawings, a notebook filled with dates, symbols that looked almost occult, and a list of names. Other children's names. Ethan's name appeared 3 times, the last entry dated just 2 weeks ago. Daniel's legs gave out. He collapsed onto the floor, pressing the shirt to his face, breathing in the faint trace of his sun that still clung to the fabric. A sound came from his throat, something between a sob and a prayer, raw and broken and desperate. Behind him, Mara began to weep. "I didn't know what to do. Oh God, I didn't know what to do." Daniel turned to her, rage and hope warring in his chest. "Where is he? Where is my son?" Mara sank against the doorframe, her whole body shaking. "My boyfriend, Kyle, he died 4 months ago in a car accident. After he was gone, I found things. Terrible things. He was involved with people who took children. He used this house as a stopping point before they moved them. I found those things, that box, and I was terrified. The men he worked with, they're dangerous. I thought if I called the police, if I told anyone, they'd come back and kill me and Grace." Daniel stood slowly, the room spinning around him. "So you kept evidence of kidnapped children in your house and said nothing?" His voice was ice, fury barely contained. "I didn't know if the boy was still alive." Kyle said the last child they brought through had escaped or been moved. "I wasn't sure. I was going to call someone, I swear. I just needed time to figure out how to protect my daughter." Mara's words tumbled out in a desperate rush. But Daniel wasn't listening anymore. Because Grace had moved to the center of the room and was staring at the ceiling with an expression of intense concentration. "The boy is still here," she said softly. Daniel's heart stopped. "What did you say?" Grace looked at him with those ancient eyes. "He's still here. In this house. I hear him at night. Crying. Scratching. Sometimes humming." As if summoned by her words, a sound drifted from somewhere above them. Soft. Almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. The sound of something scratching against wood. Then, fainter still, a whisper of melody. A tune Daniel knew as well as his own heartbeat. The lullaby he'd sung to Ethan every night since he was born. The room tilted. Daniel gripped the doorframe to keep from falling. Where is that coming from?" Grace tilted her head, listening to something only she could hear, her lips moving in what might have been prayer. Then she looked up at the ceiling, her small finger pointing to a spot directly above her bed. She turned to Daniel, her voice barely a whisper, and spoke words that would change everything. "Sir, he's above us." The sound of tires crunching gravel outside shattered the moment. Daniel's head snapped toward the window as a black pickup truck rolled to a stop in front of the house, its engine rumbling like a threat. Mara's face drained of all color. Her hands flew to her mouth, stifling a gasp that came out like a wounded animal's cry. "No, no, no, no. He's supposed to be dead. They told me he was dead." The truck door slammed. Heavy boots hit pavement. Through the thin curtains, Daniel watched a man approach. Broad-shouldered and moving with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where he was going. The front door didn't knock, didn't ring. A key slid into the lock with a metallic click that sounded like a gunshot in the silent house. The door swung open, and the man stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room with predatory efficiency before landing on Mara. "Hello, Mara. Miss me?" His voice was gravel and diesel smoke, rough and unforgiving. He was older than Kyle would have been, maybe 50, with scars mapping his knuckles and a coldness in his eyes that spoke of violence done without hesitation. Mara stumbled backward, pulling Grace behind her. "Victor, they said you were in prison. They said you got 20 years. Victor smiled, but it held no warmth, only the promise of pain. Good behavior. Funny how that works when you know the right people to threaten. His gaze shifted to Daniel, assessing him in the way a wolf measures prey. Daniel stood slowly, positioning himself between Victor and Grace, every muscle in his body coiled tight. "I'm the father of a missing boy, and I'm not leaving without answers." Victor's smile widened into something cruel. "The Carter kid. Yeah, I know who you are. Seen your face on every news channel, crying for the cameras. Rich people always think their tears matter more." He took a step closer, his hand resting casually on his belt, where Daniel could see the outline of a weapon. "Here's the thing, Mr. Billionaire. That boy belongs to the organization. He's an asset, and I'm here to collect." Daniel's blood turned to ice. "You're not taking him anywhere." Victor laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You think you got a choice? You think your money means something here?" Grace suddenly cried out, her small hands pressing against her temples, her face contorted in pain. She swayed on her feet, and Mara caught her before she fell. "Baby, what's wrong?" Grace's voice came out strangled, distant, as if speaking from somewhere far away. "God is telling me danger is inside the house. He's saying, protect them. He's saying, the evil one comes to steal." Victor's expression darkened. "That kid still doing her spooky prophet routine?" Kyle always said she was touched in the head. But Daniel saw something flicker in the man's eyes. Uncertainty. Fear, maybe, of something he couldn't understand or control. Grace suddenly pulled away from her mother, her eyes snapping open with startling clarity. She grabbed Daniel's hand, her grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. "Sir, we have to go now. Right now. He's waiting. Your son is waiting." She pulled him toward the hallway, toward the stairs, moving with urgent purpose. Victor moved to block them, but Mara stepped forward, her fear transforming into something fierce. "You're not stopping them, Victor. Not this time." Grace led Daniel up the narrow staircase, their footsteps thundering against wood. At the top, a corridor stretched into shadows. Grace moved past the main rooms, past the bathroom, to a section of wall that looked solid. She pushed aside winter coats hanging on hooks, revealing a small door, barely 3 feet tall, painted the same color as the wall to hide it. Daniel's heart threatened to explode. His hands shook so badly he could barely raise them. He knocked, soft and gentle, 3 times. Silence stretched for an eternity. Then, a voice. Thin, exhausted, terrified, but unmistakably his son's. "Dad?" The word broke Daniel into pieces. He yanked at the door, his hands fumbling with the latch, tears streaming down his face. The door swung open to reveal a tiny space, barely large enough for a child, lit by a crack of light from the eaves. And there, curled in the corner, on a pile of blankets, was Ethan. He was thin, so terribly thin. His face was smudged with dust, his hair matted, his clothes the same ones he'd been wearing 92 days ago, now hanging off his small frame. But his eyes, those beautiful brown eyes, widened with recognition and desperate hope. "Daddy?" Daniel lunged forward, pulling his son into his arms, feeling the fragile body press against his chest. Ethan's hands clutched at his father's jacket with surprising strength, and then the boy was sobbing, Deep, wrenching sounds that tore at Daniel's soul. I knew you'd come. I knew it. I prayed every day. I knew you'd find me. Daniel couldn't speak, could only hold his son and weep, his whole body shaking with relief and rage, and a gratitude so profound it felt like worship. Behind them, Mara appeared in the corridor, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry. Oh God, I'm so sorry. After Kyle died, I found him up here, terrified and sick. Kyle's men, they wanted him moved, wanted to sell him. I couldn't let that happen. God spoke to me in a dream, told me to save the child, to hide him. I've been feeding him, caring for him, but I was too afraid to let him go, too afraid they'd come back and take Grace too. Grace stared at her mother, her young face crumbling with betrayal and confusion. Mama, you lied. You lied to everyone. Fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. The moment shattered as Victor's voice boomed from the stairs. Touching reunion. Now hand over the kid. Daniel turned, still holding Ethan, and saw Victor climbing toward them, a knife now visible in his hand, the blade catching the dim light. I said, hand him over. The organization doesn't like loose ends. Daniel shifted Ethan behind him, his body a shield. You'll have to kill me first. Victor's smile was death itself. That can be arranged. He lunged forward, the knife slashing through air. Daniel barely dodged, feeling the blade whistle past his shoulder. They collided in the narrow corridor, crashing against walls, the knife dancing between them in a deadly rhythm. Ethan screamed. Mara screamed. And then Grace, small and terrified, but burning with righteous fury, ran forward into the chaos. Stop! You won't hurt them! Her voice rang out like a bell in the violence. Victor turned toward her, the knife sweeping in a wide arc, and Grace didn't stop running. Time fractured into chaos. Victor's knife arced through the air toward Grace's small frame, and Daniel's scream tore from his throat like something primal. But Grace didn't stop. She threw herself between Daniel and Victor with a courage that defied her 9 years. Her arms spread wide like she could physically hold back evil itself. You won't hurt them. God won't let you. Her voice rang with conviction that made Victor hesitate for half a heartbeat. That hesitation saved her life. Daniel lunged forward, catching Victor's wrist mid-swing, the blade stopping inches from Grace's face. They crashed against the wall hard enough to crack plaster, grappling in the narrow corridor. Ethan's screams mixed with Mara's as she yanked Grace backward, pulling her daughter away from the violence. Victor was stronger, meaner, trained in brutality that Daniel's wealth and desperation couldn't match. The knife twisted between them, seeking flesh, seeking an ending. Grace's scream pierced the chaos. Not a scream of fear, but something else entirely. A sound of pure, desperate faith. Help us! Somebody help! Her voice carried through the old house, through thin walls, through windows that had witnessed too many secrets. The neighbors, the whole street that had learned to mind their own business, suddenly couldn't ignore the sound of a child begging for salvation. Doors began to open. Voices called out. Footsteps thundered on pavement. The distraction gave Daniel the opening he needed. He drove his shoulder into Victor's chest, slamming him against the banister with enough force to knock the air from the man's lungs. The knife clattered to the floor, spinning away into shadows. Victor's fist connected with Daniel's jaw, stars exploding across his vision. But Daniel didn't let go. He held on with everything he had while voices grew louder downstairs, while Grace's prayers filled the air, while his son sobbed his name from the attic doorway. The front door crashed open. Neighbors poured in, led by an older man with a baseball bat and a woman holding her phone high. Police are coming! Stop right now! Victor saw the crowd, saw his escape route closing, and shoved Daniel hard. He bolted for the rear of the house, feet pounding, and disappeared into the alley like the demon he was. But it didn't matter anymore, because help had arrived, and Ethan was safe. Sirens wailed closer. Daniel pulled himself up the stairs on shaking legs, ignoring his split lip and bruised ribs, focused only on the small figure in the doorway. He gathered Ethan into his arms again, holding him like he could somehow undo 3 months of terror through sheer force of love. Police officers flooded the house moments later, their radios crackling, voices sharp with urgency. An ambulance crew pushed through, heading straight for Ethan. Daniel rode in the ambulance, refusing to let go of his son's hand, even as paramedics worked around him. Behind them, at the yellow townhouse, Mara stood in handcuffs as officers read her rights. Grace watched from a neighbor's porch, wrapped in a blanket, her world collapsing in real time. At the hospital, as doctors examined Ethan, Detective Rodriguez brought Mara in to give her statement. The woman was broken, her face streaked with tears, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Daniel through the glass window of Ethan's room, and even through the barrier he could see her devastation. When they finally let her speak to him, her words tumbled out in broken sobs. "I was wrong. God forgive me. I was so wrong, but I was trying to save him. After Kyle died, I found your son in that attic, half dead. His men were coming back for him. I heard God tell me in a dream, 'Save the child.' So I did. I kept him hidden. I fed him. I protected him from those monsters. But I should have called someone. I should have trusted someone." Daniel looked at this broken woman who'd kept his son prisoner while also keeping him alive. The anger was there, burning hot, but so was something else. Something that felt like exhausted mercy. "You should have told someone," he said quietly, "the moment you found him. Your fear doesn't excuse what you did. But I understand why you were afraid." Mara sobbed as officers led her away. Grace stood in the hallway, watching her mother disappear into custody, her small body shaking with grief. After Mara was gone, Grace approached Daniel slowly, her eyes red from crying. She stood before him, this little girl who'd been so brave, and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper. "Sir, I need to tell you something. 3 days before I saw you on the street, I had a dream. An angel came to me. She touched my forehead and said, 'The father's tears have reached heaven. The child will be found. Tell the truth, little one.'" Daniel's breath stopped. His entire body went rigid, because 3 nights before he met Grace, he'd collapsed on the floor of Ethan's bedroom and prayed words he'd told no one. He'd sobbed into the carpet and begged God, "Have my tears reached you? Can you see me breaking? Please let my child be found." The exact words. Grace couldn't possibly have known, unless she really had been given a message from heaven, unless God really had heard him. Daniel's knees buckled. He sank to the floor right there in the hospital corridor, his face in his hands, and wept with a force that shook his entire body. These weren't tears of grief anymore. They were tears of recognition, of awe, of confronting the reality that his prayers had been heard by something greater than the darkness he'd been drowning in. Grace knelt beside him, placing her small hand on his shoulder. When Daniel could breathe again, when he could see through the tears, he looked at this child who'd become an unlikely prophet. He took her hands in his. "Grace, you saved my son, and you saved me. I was losing my faith. I was losing myself, but you brought light back into my world. You're a hero. Do you understand? A real hero." Grace threw her arms around his neck, and they held each other, 2 souls connected by divine orchestration, both broken and both healing. 2 weeks later, Daniel carried Ethan down the hospital steps into autumn sunshine that felt like resurrection. His son was stronger now, able to walk, able to smile without shadows darkening his eyes. Daniel helped him into the back seat of the car, buckling him in with careful hands. As he walked around to the driver's side, leaves began to fall from the oak trees, gold and amber and crimson, drifting down like blessings, like visible grace. Daniel slid behind the wheel and looked at his son in the rearview mirror. Ethan was watching the leaves dance on the wind, his expression peaceful. "Dad?" His voice was soft. "Yeah, buddy? God helped me. When I was in the dark, I prayed you'd find me. And I knew you would. I knew you'd never stop looking. Daniel's throat tightened. What did God tell you, son? Ethan met his father's eyes in the mirror. He said, Your father is searching. Hold on. So I did. Daniel reached back and took his son's hand. He heard us both. Didn't he? Ethan nodded, squeezing tight. He always hears, Dad, even in the dark. As they drove away toward home, toward healing, the autumn leaves continued to fall around them like a benediction, like nature itself was celebrating, answered prayers, and the mysterious ways heaven responds when tears finally reach the throne.